The transport ship Aurora was not the fastest vessel in the galaxy, but it was known for being reliable. Its silver frame shone faintly under the glow of distant stars, and its long corridors hummed with the steady rhythm of the engines. For most passengers, this sound was simply background noise, a reminder that the journey was moving forward. For Aaron, a young human traveling for the first time across sectors, the sound carried excitement. Every hum felt like the heartbeat of a new adventure. Aaron had boarded the ship at a small station near the outer colonies. The docking bay had been crowded, filled with people of different species, some tall and shimmering with scales, others covered in soft fur, and many who walked with mechanical limbs. Among them, humans were a minority. Aaron had noticed that quickly, but it did not bother him. He had always been curious about the galaxy and eager to meet whoever shared it. Inside the passenger section, rows of seats lined the walls. Most travelers preferred to sit quietly, watching the stars through the large viewing panels. Some read from glowing data pads, while others whispered in their own languages. Arun took his place near the center, his bag tucked under the seat. He leaned back and let out a slow breath. The air inside smelled faintly metallic, mixed with the faint spice of alien perfumes. It was then that he noticed her. She sat across from him, a girl who looked different from most of the other passengers. Her skin had a faint silver-blue shade, smooth like polished stone. Her hair shimmered like strands of white light, flowing neatly over her shoulders. Her eyes were large, deep violet in color, glowing slightly when she moved. She wore a long robe made of layered fabric, each layer patterned with delicate star-shaped designs. She held herself very still, as if trying to disappear into the background. Aaron studied her for a moment, curious but cautious. She did not look around the cabin or speak to anyone. She simply sat with her hands folded neatly, her gaze fixed on the wide window beside her. Something about her posture suggested both pride and loneliness, as if she was used to being apart. He decided to greet her. After all, he believed every journey was brighter with conversation. "Hello," Aaron said with a small smile. His voice was calm, polite, and steady. The alien girl turned her head slightly, her glowing eyes landing on him. For a brief second, he thought she might ignore him. Instead, she spoke in clear words, though her tone carried a cool edge. "Keep your distance." Her voice was soft but firm, like water flowing over stone. Aaron blinked, surprised by the directness of her reply. "I mean, no harm," he said gently. "I only wanted to say hello." The girl tilted her head, studying him as though measuring his intentions. She seemed thoughtful, but after a pause, she returned her gaze to the stars. "My people do not sit close with others," she explained. "We do not form bonds easily. For us, distance is safety." Aaron nodded slowly, respecting her words. He had met travelers before who followed different customs, and he knew better than to push too hard. Still, there was something in the way she spoke, a faint hesitation behind her firmness. It made him wonder if she truly believed in the walls she had placed between herself and others, or if she was simply repeating what she had been taught. "That is fair," Aaron said after a moment. "I will respect your space." She gave no reply, but her eyes flickered briefly toward him before turning back to the window. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the soft vibration of the ship. Arun leaned back in his seat, folding his arms loosely. He did not mind silence, but he remained aware of her presence across from him. Something told him that their paths would not remain so separate. Around them, the ship continued its journey. A group of tall, insect-like beings clacked their mandibles together as they spoke in hushed tones. Two humans whispered quietly in the far corner, comparing travel routes on a glowing map. A trader with metallic arms adjusted the locks on his storage case. Life aboard the Aurora was a mixture of voices and silences, cultures and faces, yet Aaron felt his attention return again and again to the silver-blue girl. As the hours passed, the lighting in the cabin dimmed to mimic evening. Some passengers slept, while others adjusted their seats into resting positions. Aaron remained awake, his thoughts wandering. He wondered what world the girl came from, what stars she had left behind, and why she seemed so determined to remain apart. Her robe's patterns shimmered faintly in the dim light, reminding him of constellations. At one point, her eyes closed briefly, though she did not let herself rest. When she opened them again, she caught Aaron watching. Instead of anger, her expression showed curiosity, though she quickly looked away. It was a small change, but Aaron noticed. The journey was long, and silence could stretch endlessly, but Aaron felt no boredom. Something had shifted with that single exchange of words. She had warned him to keep his distance, but her voice had not carried hatred, only caution. To him, that meant possibility. He leaned his head against the seat and smiled, faintly, closing his eyes. He had no idea where this connection might lead, but he was certain of one thing. The galaxy was wide, filled with stars and mysteries, and sometimes the most important journeys began not with grand battles or discoveries, but with a simple hello and the courage to remain kind even in the face of distance. As the Aurora continued, through the vast silence of space, Aaron drifted into light rest, and across from him, the alien girl sat still, watching him quietly for longer than she intended before turning her gaze back to the stars. The Aurora moved silently through the endless dark. Outside the viewing panels, the stars stretched across space like a river of light. The engines hummed in steady rhythm, a constant reminder that the ship was alive, pushing forward across the distance between worlds. For many passengers, the voyage was long and dull. Days blended together as they sat in their seats, walked the narrow corridors, or stared at the stars. But for Aaron, every hour felt like part of a great story. He was traveling farther than he ever had before, surrounded by new faces, new species, and new possibilities. Across from him sat the silver-blue girl who had asked him to keep his distance. Her name, he would later learn, was Riva. For now, she remained silent, her violet eyes often fixed on the windows. Sometimes she studied a small device in her hands, its screen glowing with shifting star charts. Other times, she sat so still that Aaron wondered if she was deep in thought or simply lost in memory. Though she had told him not to come close, Aaron still noticed the small details about her. He saw how she tightened her robe around her shoulders whenever other passengers passed by. He saw how her gaze softened whenever she looked at the stars, as if they carried both comfort and sorrow. And he saw, once or twice, the faintest flicker of curiosity when she glanced at him, though she always looked away quickly. The days went by quietly until the Aurora passed near the edge of a cosmic storm. It began with a flicker in the cabin lights. Passengers lifted their heads in surprise as the glow dimmed, then returned, then dimmed again. A low vibration ran through the walls, stronger than the usual hum of the engines. The captain's voice came over the speakers, steady but firm. All passengers remain in your seats. We are entering a charged particle field. The ship will hold steady. A murmur spread through the cabin. Some passengers muttered nervously in their own languages. A child clutched its parent's hand. Aaron sat straighter, feeling the change in the air. He could sense the tension around him, though the danger was not yet clear. Then it struck. The Aurora shook violently as a wave of energy swept across its hull. The windows filled with sudden streaks of light, colors rippling like fire across the stars. The metal walls groaned, and a sharp alarm echoed through the ship. Passengers gasped, some crying out in fear. Aaron reacted quickly. His first thought was not of himself, but of those around him. He checked the straps on his seat, pulling them tighter, then turned to the nearest row where a small alien child struggled with its belt. Leaning across the aisle, he helped lock the strap into place, speaking calmly, though the ship trembled. "Hold on. It will be all right." His calm voice seemed to steady the parent, who gave him a quick nod of thanks. Across from him, Riva gripped her seat tightly. The violet glow in her eyes brightened as she watched the storm outside. Her people, she knew, avoided such fields whenever possible. They considered them dangerous not just for ships, but for the mind, as the shifting energy could unsettle even the strongest focus. Yet here she was, caught in the middle of one, sitting on a human vessel. The ship rocked again, harder this time. A storage case slid loose from the overhead rack and clattered to the floor. Passengers cried out, some covering their heads, others fumbling with their straps in panic. Arun stood despite the shaking and grabbed the case, pushing it back under. "The seat before it could hit anyone." "Stay calm," he said to the group near him. "The ship is built for this. It will pass." His steady words carried farther than he realized. Even Riva, though she said nothing, felt her fear lessen. She watched him carefully. Humans were known for many things: restlessness, ambition, even recklessness. But in this moment, she saw another side. He was calm under pressure, his focus not on himself, but on helping strangers. The storm continued for what felt like hours, though in truth it lasted only a short time. Flashes of color streaked across the windows, blue and red sparks dancing like living fire. The ship groaned as its shields held against the energy. Finally, the trembling slowed, the lights steadied, and the alarms faded into silence. "The captain's voice returned. "Storm passed. The Aurora remains secure. Passengers may rest easy." A sigh of relief moved through the cabin. People spoke softly to one another, checking that everyone was unharmed. A few clapped their hands lightly, cheering the ship's crew. Aaron returned to his seat and exhaled, rubbing his hands together. He was tired, but steady. He glanced across the aisle. Riva's grip on the seat had loosened, though her posture was still firm. For a long moment, her violet eyes met his. "You did not panic," she said quietly. Arun shrugged gently. "Panicking doesn't help. Better to stay calm and do what you can." Riva studied him, her gaze deep and thoughtful. "Most would think of themselves first. You did not." Arun smiled faintly. "Everyone is on the same ship. If we don't look out for each other, who will?" Her lips pressed together as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the window. Yet, something in her had changed. She no longer sat with the same sharp distance as before. The wall she held between herself and others had cracked, if only slightly. That night, as the ship lights dimmed once again, the cabin felt quieter. The storm had shaken the passengers, but it had also revealed something. For Riva, it revealed a truth she had not expected to see. Humans, she thought, were dangerous in some ways, but perhaps their true power was not in their weapons or their numbers. Perhaps it was in their ability to stay calm when others faltered, and to offer strength where others felt only fear. She closed her eyes, letting herself rest at last. Across from her, Aaron leaned back in his seat, unaware that he had already begun to change her view of his kind. The Aurora moved on through space, leaving the storm behind. The journey was far from over, but for both Arun and Riva, something new had begun. The Aurora sailed smoothly now, far from the cosmic storm that had shaken its passengers. The steady hum of the engines returned to its usual rhythm, like a soft heartbeat running through the ship. For many on board, the memory of flashing colors and trembling walls still lingered, but relief had settled in. People spoke again, moving about the cabin, adjusting their belongings, and regaining their calm. Aaron sat quietly in his seat, watching the stars glide past the large viewing window. His thoughts replayed the events of the storm, the fear in the eyes of passengers, the alarms echoing, and the relief afterward. But what stayed with him most was the glance Riva had given him. Her violet eyes had softened for a moment, and she had spoken to him not with warning, but with recognition. It was a small change, yet Aaron felt it meant something. Across from him, Riva still sat wrapped in her robe, her posture neat and careful, yet her gaze no longer avoided him completely. From time to time, her eyes shifted in his direction as though she wanted to speak, though her lips remained closed. She held herself with pride, but there was a hint of conflict in her stillness. The chance came the next day. The cabin was quieter than usual. Many passengers rested, and the only sound was the faint whisper of the ventilation system. Aaron sat, with a small pad in his hands, scrolling through maps of Earth that he had stored before leaving. He liked to remind himself of home, the blue oceans, the green forests, the crowded cities filled with light. As he zoomed in on a picture of mountains, capped with snow, he heard a voice across from him. "What is that place?" Aaron lifted his head. It was Riva. She was leaning slightly forward, her eyes focused on the glowing screen in his hands. Her tone was not cold this time, but curious. "These are mountains on my world," Aaron replied. "They are covered in snow most of the year. People climb them, though it is not easy." "Mountains," Riva repeated slowly, tasting the word as though it were new. She tilted her head. "Your world has many shapes. Oceans, forests, mountains. I have heard humans live in all of them." Aaron smiled faintly. "Yes, we try to live everywhere we can. Some places are hard, but we adapt." She seemed to think about that for a moment. Then, almost reluctantly, she asked, "Why? Why do humans go where it is hard? My people stay where life is steady. It is our way." Aaron looked back at the image of the snowy peaks. "Maybe because we always wonder what is beyond the next hill. Even if it is dangerous, we want to see it. To us, the challenge makes the place more beautiful." Her violet eyes lingered on him, as if weighing the meaning of his words. "Strange," she murmured, "and yet, perhaps not unwise." For a long moment, silence returned. Then Riva asked another question, and then another. Slowly, her curiosity unfolded like a door creaking open. She wanted to know about Earth's oceans, about animals that walked on four legs, about the sound of rain and the warmth of fire. Arun answered each question patiently, sometimes smiling as he remembered the simple things he had once taken for granted. When he spoke of birds flying through the sky, Riva leaned closer, her eyes widening. "Creatures that move through air itself, without ships?" "Yes," Aaron said. "Their wings lift them. They travel across great distances. Some even cross entire oceans." Her lips parted slightly in wonder. "My people would find that impossible. Yet it is real." Arun nodded. "Sometimes the most impossible things are the most common, if you grow up with them." The hours passed, and the distance between them seemed to shrink, not in space, but in spirit. Other passengers noticed the change. Where once the silver-blue girl had sat in silence, now she spoke, her voice soft, but alive with questions. A few travelers exchanged glances, whispering quietly. It was rare to see one of her kind so open, even with their own people, and here she was speaking freely with a human. Later, as the cabin lights dimmed for evening, Riva fell quiet again. She folded her hands neatly as though remembering her earlier words about distance. Yet she no longer carried the same rigid barrier. Instead, she looked at Aaron with a thoughtful expression. "You told me before you would respect my space," she said. "And I still do," Aaron replied gently. I will not cross what you wish to keep. Her eyes softened at that. Yet still you speak with patience. Still you answer. You do not push. Aaron shrugged lightly. Conversations are like stars. Some are close, some are far. All that matters is to notice them. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, a gesture so small that it almost vanished. Yet it was there, and Aaron caught it. That night, as most of the passengers slept, Riva remained awake a little longer. She thought of her people and their customs. They believed that closeness created weakness, that bonds tied the spirit and made it fragile. For her, this had always been truth. But now, speaking with a human, she felt something different. It was not weakness. It was warmth. She closed her eyes, unsure of what this meant, but certain that something had begun to change. The Aurora glided through the silent sea of stars, carrying its passengers farther from the storm and closer to unknown horizons. And in one quiet corner of the cabin, a human and an alien girl had taken their first small step across the distance between their worlds. The Aurora had been traveling peacefully for several days after the storm. Life aboard the ship began to feel calm again. Passengers walked through the narrow corridors, shared quiet meals in the small dining area, and sometimes gathered by the large windows to admire the endless stars. For Aaron, the days passed quickly. He found comfort in watching the galaxy outside, but more than that, he found himself waiting for small moments with Riva. She no longer ignored him completely. She asked questions, listened to his stories, and sometimes shared small details of her own world. The distance between them, though still present, was no longer a wall. On this day, however, peace broke apart. It began with a faint hiss in the air. At first, Arun thought it was part of the ventilation system, but soon the hiss grew louder, followed by a sharp alarm that echoed through the cabin. Passengers sat up in surprise, looking around in confusion. The captain's voice rang out, calm but urgent. Attention! We are experiencing a malfunction in the life support system. Please remain seated and keep calm while the crew responds. The words sent a ripple of fear through the passengers. Life support meant air, meant survival. Without it, the ship could not protect them in the void of space. The lights flickered. A thin chill entered the cabin. Aaron felt it at once. The air was growing thinner. Some passengers began to cough, others whispered nervously, their voices rising. Aaron's first instinct was to act. He unbuckled his seat straps and looked at the crew hurrying toward the access panels. They carried tools, but also carried the weight of pressure in their steps. He turned and saw Riva gripping the edge of her seat, her violet eyes wide. I should help, Aaron said to himself. Before anyone could stop him, he moved toward the crew. One officer tried to wave him back. Passengers must remain seated. It is not safe. Aaron shook his head firmly. I know basic repairs. I can help. Tell me what to do. The officer hesitated. In moments like this, extra hands could mean survival. Finally, he nodded. Follow me. The vent systems are failing. Pressure lines must be reconnected. Aaron followed him into a narrow passage at the side of the cabin. The space was tight, filled with pipes and wires. Cold air swept through the vents as the system struggled. The officer pointed to a panel. Crawl through here. There is a junction ahead. Find the leaking seal and close it. Aaron nodded without fear. He climbed into the small tunnel, his hands gripping the cold metal. The passage was dark except for the faint glow of emergency lights. The sound of rushing air filled his ears as he crawled forward. His breath felt heavier with each step. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Riva rose from her seat. She wanted to follow, but the crew held her back. Her people were known for their perception of energy flows, for sensing what others could not see. She closed her eyes and focused. She could feel it, the disturbance in the air, the broken rhythm of the ship's system. One crew member noticed her and frowned. You should remain seated. Riva opened her eyes, her voice firm. No, I can guide him. The officer hesitated, unsure. But when the alarms grew louder, he gave in. Very well. Tell him where to go. She nodded and turned, toward the narrow passage. Her voice rose, clear and steady. Human, to your right. You will see a broken seal glowing faintly. That is where the air is escaping. Inside the passage, Aaron heard her voice echo faintly. He shifted right and spotted it, a small crack in the pipe where mist escaped in a steady hiss. He pressed, forward, coughing as the air grew thinner. With quick hands, he pulled a patch kit from the emergency box fixed to the wall. He pressed the seal over the crack and locked it tight. The hiss slowed, then stopped. The lights steadied. The alarms faded. The air began to thicken again, slowly filling the cabin with life. Aaron slumped against the wall, taking a deep breath. His body ached from the crawl. But relief filled his chest. He crawled back out, his face pale but calm. The passengers cheered softly when they saw him emerge. The crew nodded in respect, their eyes showing gratitude. Riva stepped forward as he returned. For a moment she looked as though she wanted to keep her distance as always. But instead, she spoke quietly, her voice carrying both pride and relief. You listened to my guidance. Together, we stopped it. Aaron smiled faintly, brushing dust from his sleeves. I could not have done it without you. You saw what I could not. Her eyes lingered on him, shining brighter than before. She felt something shift inside her. She had broken her own rule by stepping in, by guiding him, by sharing part of her gift. And yet, instead of weakness, she felt strength. That night, after the repairs were complete, the cabin settled again. Passengers whispered about the human and the alien girl who had worked side by side to save them all. Some called it luck. Others called it courage. But for Riva, it was more than that. She sat beside the window, her robe wrapped around her shoulders. When Aaron passed by, he paused. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she did not look away. Instead, she nodded lightly, a silent gesture of trust. Arun sat back in his seat, exhausted but content. He knew this journey was changing more than just his path through the stars. It was changing how two very different souls understood each other. The Aurora moved steadily through the vast silence of space. The life support systems were stable again, repaired after the sudden crisis. The air inside the cabin was calm, and passengers had returned to their quiet routines. But though the ship seemed peaceful, something had changed. For Riva, the event left an impression stronger than she wished to admit. She had told Arun to keep his distance when they first met, yet he had stood beside her in the moment of danger. He had crawled through the narrow passages without hesitation, risking himself to save strangers. When she guided him, he trusted, her without question. Together they had prevented disaster. That memory stayed with her like a mark upon her heart. Riva sat near the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her robe drawn around her shoulders. She tried to remain still, to keep her composure as she had always been taught. Her people believed closeness weakened the spirit, bonds created dependency, distance kept them strong. Yet when she remembered the sight of Aaron returning from the passage, covered in dust but smiling calmly, she felt something stir inside her. It was not weakness. It was something else, something she had no word for. Aaron sat across from her. His posture relaxed, though his body still carried fatigue from the repair work. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes half closed as he watched the stars drift past the wide window. He had not spoken much since the crisis, but silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt like a thread holding them together. The hours passed, and the cabin lights dimmed, shifting into the soft glow that marked evening on the ship. Passengers prepared for rest. Some adjusted their seats into reclining positions. Others covered themselves with thin travel blankets. A quiet murmur of voices filled the cabin, low and steady, like the echo of a distant river. Aaron shifted slightly, pulling his bag closer. He glanced toward Riva, wondering if she might speak again. She seemed deep in thought, her violet eyes reflecting the stars. After a while, she turned toward him. "You did not hesitate," she said softly. Aaron opened his eyes fully and looked at her. "When the ship was in danger?" "Yes," she replied. "Most would have waited. You did not." Aaron gave a faint smile. There was no time to wait. Someone had to act. I only did what anyone should do. Her gaze lingered on him. Not everyone would risk themselves for strangers. Aaron thought for a moment, then shook his head. Maybe not. But we are all breathing the same air. If one of us fails, all of us suffer. Helping others is just another way of helping yourself. Riva leaned back slowly, her eyes narrowing as if in thought. His words unsettled her, not in a troubling way, but in a way that shifted her understanding. Her people had always warned that closeness brought danger, yet here was a human who saw strength in connection. She could not dismiss it. The cabin grew quieter. Passengers closed their eyes, one by one, until only a few remained awake. Riva sat upright, her hands folded, but her body was weary. She had not rested properly since the storm. Her mind kept circling around thoughts she could not settle. The endless stars outside the window blurred softly as her eyes grew heavy. Aaron noticed her struggle. "You should rest," he said gently. Her eyes opened halfway. "I do not sleep easily among others." Aaron nodded, understanding. "Then, at least close your eyes for a while. You do not have to force yourself to stay awake." She said nothing, but his words carried a calmness that reached her. Slowly, she allowed her eyes to close. She tried to keep her posture straight, but her body was tired. Her head tilted slightly, and before she realized it, she leaned sideways. Her shoulder brushed against Aaron's arm. He froze, remembering the first words she had ever spoken to him. "Keep your distance." For a moment, he thought he should move away, yet he stayed still. He did not want to break the fragile trust that had brought her close. Riva's head rested lightly against his shoulder. Her breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of sleep. She had crossed the line she once guarded so fiercely, not in words but in silence, in the simple act of letting herself lean on him. Aaron sat still, his body careful not to disturb her. He looked around, wondering if the other passengers had noticed. A few had. Some watched with quiet curiosity, others with faint smiles, but no one spoke. They understood that something rare was unfolding. As the ship drifted through space, Arun let his gaze return to the stars. The moment felt strangely peaceful. He did not know why Riva had allowed herself to rest on him, but he knew it meant trust. She had chosen him, a human stranger, as the one person safe enough to lean upon. That thought filled him with quiet. Pride, not for himself alone, but for what it said about his kind. Hours passed in silence. The cabin lights dimmed further, leaving only the glow of the stars through the wide window. Aaron remained awake, watching the endless sea of light while Riva slept soundly against his shoulder. The hum of the engines carried them forward, steady and unbroken. When she stirred at last, she blinked and lifted her head quickly, her face showing surprise. She looked at him, as if expecting judgment. "You fell asleep," Aaron said gently, his tone free of mockery. Riva lowered her gaze, her silver-blue skin faintly glowing under the soft light. "I told you to keep distance," she whispered. "And I respected that," Aaron replied calmly. "But you chose this. You trusted me. That is enough." Her violet eyes rose to meet his. She searched his face for any sign of scorn, but she found none. Instead, she found honesty, patience, and quiet warmth. Slowly, she exhaled, her voice softer than before. I did not mean to. Yet, it felt safe. Aaron smiled faintly. Then maybe it was not a mistake. For the first time, Riva did not look away. She held his gaze, and her lips curved into the smallest of smiles, fragile yet real. The aurora sailed on through the stars, and in one quiet corner of the ship, two travelers, one human, one alien, had crossed a boundary not with words, not with promises, but with the simplest gesture of trust, the weight of a tired head resting on a steady shoulder. The aurora glided silently through the dark sea of stars. The passengers had begun to settle into their routines again after the crisis. The quiet hum of the engines was constant, a reminder that the ship moved steadily toward its destination. Inside, life seemed calm, but something between Aaron and Riva was quietly changing. Since the incident in the life support passage, the distance between them had lessened. Riva no longer avoided him entirely, though her posture remained careful. Arun noticed small gestures, her eyes lingering slightly longer, the faint tilt of her head when he spoke, the quiet curiosity in her questions. On this evening, the cabin was dim, only soft lights illuminating the narrow aisles. Some passengers were reading, others sleeping, and a few walked slowly along the corridors. Aaron sat near the window, gazing at a cluster of bright stars that seemed almost close enough to touch. Riva sat across from him, her violet eyes studying him as she often did. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but firm. I do not understand humans fully. You act without fear in dangerous moments. You trust easily, even with strangers. Aaron turned to her. We do not always act without fear, but we try to see what can be done instead of giving in to fear. Trust comes from understanding, not from recklessness. Riva's gaze shifted to the window. She seemed to wrestle with something. My people, we are trained to avoid close bonds. We fear what may happen if we depend on another. Emotions can change us. Attachments make us vulnerable. Aaron nodded. I can understand that. But being close does not always make one weak. Sometimes it makes you stronger. She looked at him sharply, her eyes questioning. Stronger? Yes, Aaron said. When we work together, when we trust, we can survive dangers alone cannot face. Connection gives courage. Riva considered his words. She had always been told that dependency brought ruin. Her people valued distance, solitude, and self-control. Emotions were to be managed, bonds to be avoided. Yet after the storm and the life support crisis, she had felt something different. She had felt security in Arun's presence. I do not know if it is safe, she admitted finally. Arun leaned slightly forward. Safety is never guaranteed, but courage grows when someone helps you see that even in danger you are not alone. Her hands twisted in her lap, the robe around her shoulders softening as she relaxed a little. Humans are different. You speak of courage as if it is something ordinary. For us, it is rare. Aaron smiled faintly. Perhaps it is ordinary. For us, because we value it in others. We learn strength not only from ourselves, but from those who care. The soft hum of the ship carried them as they spoke. No one else seemed aware of the conversation unfolding in the quiet corner. Riva's eyes reflected the stars, violet mixed with silver, her mind turning over the new ideas. You did not hesitate during the storm, she said, even when the others panicked. I did what needed to be done, Arun replied, because it mattered, and because helping others is not weakness. It is responsibility. She studied him silently, weighing each word. Her species feared emotions because they were unpredictable. but she could not deny what she had seen. Arun had acted calmly, patiently, and with purpose. His trust in her guidance had saved the ship. His courage had inspired her. Perhaps your kind is stronger than I believed, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Aaron shook his head. Strength is not just in physical ability or rules. Strength is in choices, courage, trust, patience, even kindness. Those are strengths humans value. Riva blinked slowly. For the first time, she felt something unfamiliar, a warmth that was not fear or caution. She felt a connection, fragile but real, growing between herself and this human. It was not weakness. It was understanding. She looked away briefly, then back at him. I do not know if I can let myself feel this. Attachment is dangerous. Arun smiled gently. Not all attachments are dangerous. Sometimes they make life possible. We do not have to be alone in facing the universe. Riva's shoulders relaxed slightly. She had crossed her own rule once when she had leaned on his shoulder to rest. That moment had not harmed her. In fact, it had comforted her. Now, hearing his words, she realized that perhaps closeness was not something to fear entirely. It could be a source of strength. I have never felt this before, she admitted. Not with anyone. Aaron nodded quietly. Then maybe this is the right person to start. Her violet eyes met his, searching, questioning, and slowly softening. Trust was fragile for her, but it had begun. Aaron did not push further. He remained calm, patient, and present. Sometimes, the greatest power is in simply being there. The hours passed in quiet conversation. They spoke of stars, of distant planets, and of simple human traditions that seemed odd but fascinating to her. Aaron told stories of the forests and oceans of Earth, of mountains that rose higher than clouds, and rivers that stretched across continents. Riva listened, fascinated, comparing each detail to the deserts, rivers, and mountains of her own world. As the cabin lights dimmed further for night, the Aurora moved steadily through space. Passengers slept or rested, and a few worked quietly in the observation deck. Arun and Riva remained in their quiet corner, a human and an alien, sharing words, understanding, and something that neither had expected. By the time Riva finally leaned back against her seat, she felt a small but important change inside her. Fear of closeness still existed, but it had lessened. She had learned that trust did not have to be weakness, that bonds could carry strength rather than burden, and most importantly, she had learned that humans carried a courage that came from connection, not just from themselves. Aaron noticed the shift as well. He saw her eyes soften, her posture relax, and a faint smile curve her lips. It was not grand, not dramatic, but it was real. They had crossed a boundary together, one built from understanding, patience, and shared courage. Riva's voice broke the silence. I am beginning to see. Perhaps being close is not always dangerous. Aaron smiled, letting the stars outside reflect in his eyes. Perhaps not, and perhaps it can even be good. The Aurora continued forward, silent in the darkness, carrying its passengers toward new horizons. And in one quiet corner, a human and an alien girl had begun to bridge the distance between their worlds, breaking barriers not with force, but with trust, courage, and the quiet power of understanding. The Aurora sailed steadily through the endless darkness of space. Stars stretched in all directions, silent witnesses to the journey of the ship and its passengers. The cabin was quiet, the passengers resting or quietly moving about. Yet for Arun and Riva, the journey had reached a different level of meaning. Since the life support crisis, Riva had changed. The fear that had held her distant was no longer as strong. She had leaned on Aaron's shoulder had spoken to him honestly, and had begun to see the value of trust and connection. She was learning something new, not just about humans, but about herself. Arun noticed the change in her as well. Her questions were no longer just curious, they were thoughtful. Her eyes held a warmth that had been absent before. He understood that she was beginning to open herself to something her people had long warned against: closeness. The ship began to approach the edge of a star cluster, a vibrant collection of blue and gold lights that shimmered like jewels in space. The Aurora's passengers moved to the observation decks to see the spectacle. Arun and Riva stood side by side, watching the beauty unfold. "It is magnificent," Riva said softly, her voice full of awe. Arun nodded, his eyes reflecting. "The same colors. It is. I have never seen anything like it." She turned slightly toward him. "On my world, we rarely look beyond our own skies. We do not travel far. We do not risk ourselves beyond what is necessary." Arun smiled faintly. "That is why the stars feel so new to us. Humans explore because we wonder. We face danger because we want to know what is out there." Riva considered his words. "You do not fear the unknown as we do?" "Fear is natural," Arun admitted. "But we choose to act despite fear. And we do not act alone if we can help it. That is the difference." She looked at him, a mixture of curiosity and respect in her gaze. "I see now. Your courage is not only in facing danger, it is in trusting others, in relying on them, and in allowing them to rely on you." Arun nodded. "Yes. Strength is not just in yourself. It is in connection. Together we can survive more than we could alone." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The star cluster reflected in their eyes, but the real light was in the quiet understanding forming between a human and an alien girl. As the passengers began to return to their seats, Riva spoke again. "I think I understand now. Perhaps closeness is not weakness. Perhaps it is necessary at times." Arun smiled gently. "Sometimes it is the only thing that carries us through the darkness." Later, the ship passed a small, vibrant planet, covered in green forests and blue seas. The Aurora had been traveling toward this new world for weeks, and now the destination was almost in sight. Passengers prepared for landing, adjusting harnesses, checking equipment, and speaking in quiet excitement. Riva remained beside Arun. "Humans seem different than I expected," she said. "Not reckless, as some of my people warned. Brave, yes, but also thoughtful, patient, and kind." Arun looked at her. "We are not perfect, but we try to do what is right. And we try to care for each other." She nodded slowly. "I see that now. I am grateful for your guidance, for your patience, for your courage." Arun shrugged gently. "I only did what anyone should do. But I am glad it helped you see something new." Riva's gaze softened. She had crossed boundaries she had once held sacred. She had allowed herself to trust a human, to rely on him, and to share moments of vulnerability. And in return, she had discovered something profound. Connection could give strength, not weakness. The Aurora descended through the atmosphere of the planet, the engines adjusting to the changing gravity. The passengers braced for landing, excitement and tension blending in the air. Outside the windows, the planet's surface stretched wide, mountains, rivers, and forests rolling into view. The landing was smooth. The ship settled on a flat plain, the engines powering down with a low hum. Passengers cheered quietly, relieved and exhilarated. Arun and Riva stepped off the ship together, their feet touching the soft grass of a new world for the first time. Riva inhaled deeply. The air was fresh, filled with sense of earth and life. She had never experienced anything like it. Her people rarely traveled so far, rarely felt air so different, so rich, so alive. Aaron looked around, his own eyes wide. "It is beautiful," he said. "A new world to explore, a new home for discovery." Riva turned to him. "It is more than I expected. Perhaps the journey was as important as the destination." Aaron smiled. "Yes, and perhaps what we discovered. Along the way, trust, courage, understanding is what will guide us now." She nodded slowly. For the first time, she felt free from the strict rules of her people. She had crossed the boundary of distance and learned the value of connection. She had allowed herself to trust a human, and in doing so, she had grown stronger, braver, and more open to the universe. As they stood together on the grass of the new planet, the stars above twinkling faintly in the fading light, Aaron and Riva looked at each other. No words were needed. They had learned much from one another: patience, courage, and the quiet power of trust. For Riva, it was a lesson that would never be forgotten. Humans were not perfect, but they carried something her people often overlooked: the ability to find strength in each other. And Arun had shown her that courage was not only facing danger, but embracing the bonds that make life meaningful. The Aurora rested behind them, engines cooling, passengers beginning their first steps on a new world. Arun and Riva walked together, side by side, ready to face the challenges and wonders of this new horizon.